going to focus what I'm going to talk to you about today on the food and environment aspect, not on the medical and vaccination problems that are also part of this gene technology bill. I don't know whether any of you have seen one of my presentations before, but I'm going to apologise to you now because my main aim is to give you information, to try and land it in your brains and your hearts to some extent, so you know stuff that when you have the debate, you have those discussions, you've got stuff in your bag to say, right, hang on, what about that? I'm not an expert. And I may sound like an expert when I'm standing up talking, but I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist. I work with scientists. I work with doctors. I'm a trustee for Physicians and Scientists for Global Responsibility, who are doing some excellent work currently, actually, on one of the submissions that's open now. And I think there'll be some talk later on about the radio emissions bill. So physicians and scientists, I know, are writing a very major piece on that. It's another technology, and I'll talk about technology, because actually this is all about technology, in this case gene technology, but there's other kinds of technology that are coming into our world. So bear with me if it becomes too many. I mean, a lot of these slides are clips from journals or articles, and it's just the headline you need to look at, so don't worry about it if you say, oh, there's too many slides. There may be, and I apologize for that, but I'll show you the ones I almost cut, and I'll tell you why I didn't cut them, because it's so important. This is a picture from Tuesday, and there was a lovely event at Parliament Steps where the petition by Lisa Eyre, who established Lisa's Hummus years ago, she put a petition forward, kind of on behalf of all of us, and in fact, a few of us said, word it this way and that way. And that was the presentation. It asked for the gene bill to be stopped and for a commission of inquiry to be held about the risks. And I guess the reason for that is because this is a rush job. Even though a lot of machinations have been going on for years, the bill's really been written in a rush, and it's alarmed, believe it or not, the people that this morning there was a protest outside Fonterra to say, wake up, speak up for GE-free, non-GMO production, because even the Fonterras of this world know that this bill is extremely dangerous to our future. So in terms of what we're talking about, I thought I'd put this up front before I talk about who I am and give you the rest of the presentation. I did this little, it's not everything that's wrong with this bill, but I put it up as a checklist because when this bill came out, this was the shock, that there was no precaution. They'd removed the precautionary principle from the bill and were taking it away from local councils being able to apply it. And if you don't know what it is, it's basically the thing about doctors doing no harm. Basically, if you don't know what you're doing, you don't do it. And there's a lot of people in expert situations who feel they do know what they're doing, but they tend to be quite based in a particular lens of speciality, and very few of them are ecologists. Even though they might say they've got a plant to put out to save the world, that's GE, they're not ecologists often, and they're working in silos. But I won't read that out, but you can see some of the things that are on the agenda, including traceability and labelling. Again, if someone says to you, oh, but traceability and labelling is not mentioned in the bill, that's the problem. It's not in the bill, and it needs to be. And the last one I'll just touch on, because that's where I end up. There's multiple futures heading our way, and we need to have one which is safe food and sustainable and ethical, even if other countries or even parts of our country go some other way. And unfortunately, because we're one country, you can't have both. So I believe GE-free production in our food and environment is an economic asset. And I say that because there's evidence for it, but I also say that it's because that might be the only thing that government listen to. Even though they haven't listened so far, so maybe that's a foolish thing to say, but they did no economic analysis on this bill. It's all on the promise of money in the future from gene technology. There's not a lot of evidence to say what that money actually looks like, apart from through patents and forever you'll be able to make some money now, but at what cost?
I think you need to add to that at the bottom, no going back, it's irreversible.
Absolutely. Yeah. I could add a lot more. Keep your list, and because I can add a lot more. So just for what we're going to talk about today, I'll do a little introduction.
Okay, just sit here, I can hear better.
Okay. I might just move my tea, otherwise I'll fall over and knock it over. Thank you. The risks, specifically, some risks to talk about. The threat to the right to choose, which is kind of relates to that, is because the risks that are emerging are being transferred. They're being transferred from companies and organisations and farming companies to farmers, to consumers, to the retail industry, to society, into nature. And that risk transfer is all about choice, because if you have a choice, who's going to take the transfer of the risk? No thanks. And the whole battle is to remove that right to choose, so you haven't got a voice to say, I don't want to support this. I'll talk a little bit about the big one, not necessarily from our personal experience, but for the country and for government, the money thing, the exports. And then I'll talk about communities, because as well as the national body elections, you've got the local body elections this year, which I know Rock the Vote's taking part in, and pressure into the candidates and into the group standing for local government. So most of the time, I hope, at the end of this, we'll have a good ginwag and talk about what to do and how we can do it. Very quickly, I'm an expert in kind of one thing, I suppose, and that's market research for my sins. So I've worked for years for really large companies in New Zealand. And so I work with the idea that the consumer is king and queen. Companies are supposed to be designing products and services that meet their needs, and market research is a way to discover that or test out things. Now, of course, it's a little bit more, sometimes more sinister than that. A lot of the time more innocent than that. It is trying to find out what consumers want. But my bottom line has been that I know what consumers want in terms of the majority of consumers want from the data I have seen, and they want the choice and they want non-GMO food, and that's not just in New Zealand but globally. Now, yes, you will be able to sell GE food. Most of it goes into animal feed and ethanol and things like that at the moment, or seeps into highly processed foods. But no one really wants GM food except the people who believe, and accept their belief system. They believe they've got solutions to problems and that they can make some money out of it through patents to do that solution. The problem is that there's some other solutions, better solutions, more comprehensive solutions that are being sidelined to do the GE thing. In terms of the overarching theme then, this is a very simple diagram, but gene technology and these other technologies, including AI, including nanotechnology, are really changing what it means to be human and how we relate to nature through technology, through industry, through what we eat, how we grow it. So in a way, nature, we're all part of nature, but there's the people bit, which are part of nature, and there's the technology bit, which comes from us. But if you wanted to do it, I'm sure someone clever could do a really amazing diagram, but it's like technology is coming between the people and nature and then going to change nature. So this is a very simple diagram suggesting something much messier than this. So I've got 3 slides to try and explain what my understanding is of the debate. And this is a specific debate now about the labelling and regulation of gene-edited food in New Zealand, because we haven't got any being produced here, but we do import GM food. And I'll talk about gene editing and GMOs, because gene editing and GMOs are the same thing. Different technologies a little bit, different processes. In fact, there's lots of different processes. I didn't even put them all on this chart. What we're talking about is that the reason why I put that red dot is because this is how I'm conceiving of it. There is an interaction of technology and nature. And now they're saying, oh, we're moving the goalpost. And this, when I say they, this is like Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, who set the standards for labelling and regulation. The standards that companies say, oh, we follow FSANZ. So if you say, oh, have you got GE ingredients? Will you label them? We follow FSANZ. And what FSANZ have done over about 10 years is set up a system whereby GE ingredients can come into New Zealand. They can be sold. They don't have to be labelled if they're highly processed, like oils, are highly processed, on the basis it's got no DNA left. They're now going further to say, and also we're going to stop labelling these other products that are coming your way on the basis they haven't got any foreign DNA. They're not like crossing a frog with a tomato, which caused a lot of upset in the past as an image. They're saying we're just going to change the gene, so we're not changing it from a frog to the tomato. We're just going to change the ones that are in the tomato now. But the gene technology is very clever, and you can almost consecutively make lots of changes to that tomato, so it's more and more like the frog gene you wanted. I say that as a kind of example because the argument is there ain't no frog genes in this food, so why are you worried? And I'll try to explain to you why we should be worried. Because genetic engineering and genetic modification, which is what all of these things are on that blue line, about 15 years ago, a new form of genetic engineering. When I say new form, it's not a new form, but it's a new technology, very successful, very efficient, and I'll talk about this, called CRISPR-Cas9. That's when people say gene editing, they mainly mean that because it's so easy and successful and efficient. And what it can do, it can make little changes, or it can make a little change with a little bit more change, and maybe a guide to what changes in the genome. And I'm not going to go into the technology, but that's why SDN1 and SDN2 is there. And what SDN1 and SDN2 is exactly what I described. It's a little change, mainly in plants and maybe in animals, but definitely in plants. We're not talking about knowing what those look like. There's a little change here and a little change there. It's very hard to know what that looks like when you're not just talking about a plant traditionally planted for farming, but when you're talking about everything, when you're talking about viruses and microorganisms, microbes, fungi, plants, and animals. And what the Gene Technology Bill and what the FSAN's bills or regulations are doing is they're saying all of this is natural. They're moving the line up. So SDN2 and SDN1, small changes. There's a thing called null segregants, and that's where you've used gene editing and genetic engineering in the process, but you can crossed it out. So you've got some of the benefits you wanted from the gene editing process, but now this plant, and it mainly is plants, is what's called a null segregant. So it's like it could have happened in nature again. So the key thing about those three things is that the scientists, independent scientists, say it may be what you think it is, but you can't deregulate it because someone independent of the companies needs to check what it is that you've done. And if it is what you think you've done and it is safe, then it's a different discussion about what the other impacts might be. But what they're saying is that for years, we've had traditional breeding of plants and animals. There's no, that I've come across, traditional breeding of bacteria, traditional breeding of viruses, apart from what we know that goes on in labs. But traditional breeding is what we're talking about for plants and animals. They're saying hybridization, everyone knows about that. There's a bit of a furphy that say, oh, well, we've been doing this for years. And you say, well, no, traditional breeding and hybridization is not what we're talking about. We're talking about lab-based technologies, traditionally. And in between those two things, the GM and the GE and the nature, is chemical mutagenesis. And one of the arguments for the food authorities and industry against the public and against the independent scientists is to say, well, look, we've been doing this. We've been doing scrambling of genes with chemicals or radiation to make new varieties. And we've been doing it for 80 years. And there are some plants that, I'm not sure how many, but they say, oh, your cauliflower is that. There's some reasons why, even though mutagenesis does sound like it's a scrambling kind of destruction of the genome defends itself. And so in mutagenesis, there are parts of the genome that will not be changed, that will repair itself because it's biologically significant. What they're saying is that the new technology is much more accurate, much more precise, much more targeted. It could be more targeted, but it's also very clever and complex. So let me just move on because I think I'm going ahead of myself. So they want to move the dot to there. They want to say that the meeting of technology and nature is back there, and I guess the point is that they want to leave it to the companies to decide that that's what they are, that that's what they're doing, that it's safe. They're assuming safety. So that rather than regulating it, having independent testing to say, is this organism the thing you think it is? Or has some other changes happened accidentally? And what does that mean? They're saying can all be left to companies and that you don't need a right to choose. And why don't you need a right to choose? Because it's just like nature. I mean, if you're happy with chemical mutagenesis, surely you're happy with a more targeted version of it. And there's some reasons to say, well, no, we're not. And I'll explain to them my version of that. But to help this communication to the public to take away the right to choose, they've got some new words to describe what these products are. And I've listed them, not all of them, but what they're saying is, oh, no, these aren't GMO. And you'll hear this. oh, the GMOs will continue to be labelled in supermarkets. Now, there's not a lot of GMO labelling in supermarkets because the companies stopped using GMO that they have to label because consumers don't want it. So any GMO that is in the supermarkets is highly refined stuff and hidden in the main. But what they're saying is that's no longer going to have to be the case because we're redefining nature to include all these genetic engineering capabilities, and we're going to call them new breeding techniques or precision breeding or gene editing, but it's not GMO, it's GE. Now, these are the same technologies, highly advanced, advancing all the time, incredibly clever, incredibly powerful. And what the independent scientists are saying is that you cannot assume that all of that, even if you're persuaded in the company that this is just like nature, it could have happened in nature, you've got to be much more rigorous than that. And that's what's being taken away by the Gene Technology Bill, exclusion of regulations of these things, and the Food Authority's activity, P1055, that says, oh, these are no longer going to be called GMOs, you don't have to label them, so they're going to come into the market without being labelled or traced.
It's a bit like what you're doing with chemtrails and
well,
with a modification, same thing, different name.
And the language is absolutely, it's changed the language, it's just like nature being the operative one.
Yeah.
So it's about the gene technology exemptions as much as what's in the gene bill, which we looked at a few minutes ago. And so I actually stuck to the brief on this. When I say the brief, I was asked what I'm going to talk about. So this is what I'm going to talk about. What happens if New Zealand allows unregulated gene-edited plants, animals, and bacteria, and viruses, and fungi into the environment? And I can tell you, it's a nightmare. If that goes ahead, I can't see any way where it won't be a nightmare at some point in time into the future. However careful and believing they are in the biotechnology company, things go wrong, and I'll show you some examples. The reason why, and this again, I'm not a scientist, but I work with scientists and I try and take the scientific arguments. The reasons why gene editing needs to be regulated is because it's so powerful. It's much, much more powerful than we might imagine because it's got not only a scale effect in that it's so easy to do. Lots of people can do it. You can do lots of things quite quickly over the next 5 or 10 years. There'll be lots. It's a gold rush. Companies all over the world are saying, we can edit genes really easy, really cheaply. Let's go for it. They're not ecologists. They're not knowledgeable about what, even as you're doing that, if you're doing it in an unsecure, non-clinical environment, you're going to get cross-contamination throughout this process. So the argument that this GE product hasn't got any foreign genes from the start might not be true, because accidentally in the journey into this product, they might have been using materials that will be contaminated already that can transfer into the new product. Obviously, when I say obviously, when you're changing genetic sequences, specifically for the things like trying to target a pest insect, a particular pest. So it's all like this pest, not that one there, but this pest has got certain sequences, so we can design a pesticide to build into the plant or spray that will kill this pest, but none of the others. None of the others, some of the others, not many of the others, a few of the others, the ones that are not important, but it won't harm the important ones. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense to say there will not be off-target effects in the open environment. And the question is how significant they are. So,
do you see this as similar to the plastics industry with BPA? They just redefine it.
Well, I think the point was that the wording and the redefining is absolutely. I mean, the plastics industry related to the oil industry. There's lots of being plastics. It's a different topic. I mean, we can talk about it later. But But as I said, my understanding is that CRISPR particularly can reach the parts that traditional scrambling of genes can't reach. It can get into the genome that is innately protected by nature to preserve itself. CRISPR's so clever, it can go in and change those genes too. And the other thing is that the whole argument against the public wanting to know is that, back to that previous slide, it's just like nature. So the wording that's used is substantial equivalence, substantially equivalent to traditional food. That's the wording that the food authorities use to say you don't have to label it because it's substantially equivalent to traditional food. And the nonsense of that is that in Australia, lab-grown quail is now being marketed. So it got approval from the food authorities in Australia. Don't rush, sorry. There'll be time to buy it any time in the future. Probably not, actually, as you'll see. But lab-grown quail, I'm pretty sure in saying, has been approved because it's substantially equivalent to real quail, because if you look at the numbers, there's that much of fat, yep. There's that much of protein, yep. There's that many, that, yep. That looks like quail, so it's quail. That's my understanding. No one's going to buy it. I really don't think many people are going to buy it, and I'll give you some reasons why in a minute. Just about the GMO, the GE, the language thing. Gene editing is genetic modification, and people know that, even without a little diagram. They know it intuitively, and they certainly know it when somebody explains what we are talking about. What is gene editing? What is genetic modification? What is traditional breeding? And if you do that, they say, oh, that gene editing, that's genetic engineering, genetic modification, and that is nature. And in people's minds, there's quite a clear difference. One's lab-based, if they know about it, and one's natural, it could happen in nature. But that's what the debate is. Oh, it could happen in nature, but we're going to do it in the lab, so it's now natural, which of course it's not. The consumers know that, and Plant and Food know that the consumers know that, because they did this research a few years ago in a number of countries about attitudes to gene editing. Because unfortunately, the sad thing is it's coming our way. Globally, they want to do this, and the fight is to stop them destroying choice and to stop them destroying natural agriculture and nature in that journey. But they know that, and internationally, where markets are a bit more exposed to GE and GMOs over time, because we haven't had it here. So this debate hasn't been going on. You haven't worried about it when you go to the supermarket. Where is that vegetable from? If it's from New Zealand, you know it's GE-free. Countries all over the world, our export markets are saying, when I say countries, the people are saying they want to know. They want gene-edited, labelled. And there's not a few people, it's a lot of people. And in Germany, that's a very recent survey, 94% of Germans, and they again know more about it than, say, the average person in New Zealand. So just the first major point is that irrespective of expert opinion, and it is varied, and of course the companies have got lots of experts saying, yeah, no, you guys are all wrong, this is just like nature, you don't need to know, it will just confuse you, you have a choice, here it is, unlabelled. People want the right to choose, and as a democracy, that needs to be a pillar.
Can you just go back one slide so I can make
Sure.
please?
Sure. So the market knows that people don't want GMOs. Well, at least they want the choice. There are some people who say, oh, I might buy it, and they'll definitely buy it if it's cheap, by the way. You sell anything cheap and people will buy it, so without knowing, probably. But that's not ethical, but it's marketing. So let's talk about the benefits and risks. I think it's really important because the benefits, I want to talk about the benefits of genetic engineering and gene editing. I've touched on a few of them already. These benefits about how it's going to help us as a society. And I'm sounding a little bit sarcastic, but I don't mean to. I think there are benefits in genetic engineering, I really do. I think the science, even if it's things like you can look at a sheep and you can read its genes. These are all very simplistic, like narrow conversations, but you can see what the genes that are beneficial, and then you can mate it with a ram with the similar genes, and you've got what's called marker-assisted breeding. So you've identified things that are in nature, really are in nature, and you're crossbreeding them. That's the end of that survey. But what the hopes and the dreams and aspirations are is huge. It's reseeding nature itself with patented organisms that a company can own. I've added control. That's one of the dreams, as you probably well understand. But these are the kind of promises. And it's very hard for the ordinary member of the public to say, yeah, don't want any of that. No. So you should have a right to choose what you're going to have and what you're not going to have. And I believe the line, certainly for agriculture and food, is internal production versus external production. So we should keep our natural environments GE-free. It doesn't mean that you can't go, if you want to, go and make some lab-grown milk, which is what's going on. In fact, our mayor is supporting one of the companies doing that. And it's very hard to argue against why you shouldn't do that. I'll give you some reasons why you might not want to drink it, but if they want to try and make money, the counter to that is a lot of that money is coming from either investment speculation globally, billions and billions. So much money is going into this sector to try and get part of the action. But at the end of the day, some of that money is coming from the public purse. And today, Shane Retty, who's the minister in charge of this bill and science and technology, announced, I think it was like $260 million fund for AI, synthetic biology and supercomputing or something like that. And I mention that is because they will all work together. They are starting to work together, and they will all work together. They'll use AI to invent new gene sequences, sometimes new, sometimes based on reality, but sometimes potentially completely new. Make new proteins, and then have that somehow introduced. And again, that's why regulation is needed, because without the regulation, that is a Wild West. But let's go quickly through these. Cure cancer, yep, wait for that. And there's lots of work doing that. Unfortunately, sometimes it backfires and people die of the treatment. This is the reality of medical research. De-extinction of the moa, nonsense kind of. Seriously, if you read what the scientists are saying about it, they'll spend millions of dollars, 10 years. They might get what they want. It might look like a moa. Who knows? It's not. It sounds sexy. So, okay, well, if you want to regenerate the moa, but do we have to eat it? And does it have to be running around our gardens? No. And in a way, the microscopic GE is the equivalent of the moa, de-extincting the moa, but de-extincting or reinventing new microbes, new fungi that in the environment will make a significant difference potentially to life on Earth. Vaccines, better vaccines, better vaccines, vaccines, better vaccines. And not just the ones that we've had recently, but all vaccines will then go onto a platform which, as far as I can see, is fundamentally flawed, because it can't have a dose effect. It's basically, they're working on that, I'm sure. You heard about the baby with the 3 parents. Again, sorry, that was another one, but this one was Wellcome Institute developing artificial human DNA, mainly for research, I suspect. Hopefully not. There is someone in this world who'll be mad enough to think, oh, we could build a whole human being from the data we've got and we can construct it. Now, I hope that never happens, but that's the kind of the dreams and the hopes and the aspirations that some people might have. Lab-grown meat, we've talked about it. Again, arguing that this is a better way to feed the world without the impacts on the environment. There's people I'll show you, I better speed up actually, but there's someone that I want to show you who's part of a leading lobby group globally who wants to detach humans from farming, end farming, rewild nature, and have basically people eating lab-grown food. And I think there may be some farming, maybe it's animal farming they want to completely stop. Gene drives possums, kill possums here, kill possums in Australia maybe, not so good. And the last one, big time, I won't go on to it, but this is all about money. And that's why I made that point about the argument to government. They don't care about choice, I don't think, but they might care about the money. And this bill threatens our economy.
John, what about the fact that they're putting gene therapy into our vegetables? Now,
Well, hopefully not yet.
No,
and that's
apparently they are, but I mean, how are you going to monitor if you get an injection in your food? And
well,
tomorrow you're going
this
to
is the
open it up?
nightmare. This is the nightmare that I'll talk a little bit about it. It's not so much in the food, but it's more the use of gene technology outside the lab.
Right.
And that might be in the food, in effect. So let's very quickly, I'm going to go through, and this is a very fast-paced slides, but this came out like 2 weeks ago. The Institute of Responsible Technology are very good, independent global commentators and information source. And they just said after 30 years of GM claims, there ain't a lot to show for it other than Roundup Ready crops, BT crops that kill the insects. Basically, those two dominating the markets in America and Brazil and other places, and very few others, actually. But when it comes to gene editing, the new, shiny, new technology was much more, not GMO, but this gene editing, which it is GMO. Not a lot of that has been successful in the markets where it's been able to be implemented. So I just want to quickly whiz through. One of them that I haven't shown you is non-browning mushrooms, launched apparently in America, don't seem to be on the market anywhere. So that was one of the ones that's fallen by the wayside. But I did this slide last year, so there may be 7, there may be 8, there may be 10, there could even be 20, but not a lot of successful gene-edited products in the market in America. Let me take you through some of them. The GE salmon. The Canadian launch, do you remember 20 years or 25 years ago, there were some GE salmon experiments here, and Kim Hill got into big trouble on national radio calling the PR agency dodgy for saying to the company, don't mention the deformed heads, which is fair enough. They weren't being dodgy. It's very sensible. Don't mention deformed heads to the public about our GE salmon experiments. Very reasonable advice. Salmon in in Canada, they've just shut down. Now, there is some new labs setting up in Japan, but the Canadian one is closed. The lab-grown chicken, not quail, but chicken that was launched in America again 2 or 3 years ago, fanfare, flash, posh New York restaurants. Because don't forget, this is a mind game in a way. Not only do you not need to know about the GE in your food that might come your way if it's not unlabeled, but you might want these lovely new products, and posh people eat these lovely new products, posh people in posh restaurants. So it must be okay. And mistakes have happened before, and this isn't a food one, but they developed a hornless cow in America, gene edited, launched to the market, big hero product. And then, for some reasons, I think the regulators were looking at the genome after it was on the market and started spotting antibiotic genes and other extraneous genes that weren't supposed to be in the cow. So they withdrew it, and I think rejigged the genes to take out the antibiotic marker genes anyway. But it was a lesson to say you can't rely on the companies to do the due diligence. You've got to have regulation. In New Zealand, a slightly different tack, but you know about this push to have more glyphosate in, and other chemicals. It wasn't just glyphosate. But this gentleman here, what's his name? Mr. Arbuckle. Apparently he's got a lot of influence. He was doing leading the talk about the glyphosate, but he's also doing lots of other things around food and regulation. But he seems a very powerful man. Never met him, don't know him. Couldn't remember his name until I saw this. And I guess coming from a market research background, I'm always aware of, again, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I really am not an expert. So I'm trying to lay out what the expert debate is that's been hidden from the public because they don't want the public to have any debate at all. But in in Brazil, they have got evidence of large-scale increases in child cancer in those fields where they're growing, particularly the glyphosate-resistant crops. So these are real things. And my point, and this slide actually, I did to some farmers a couple of months ago because I said, like, consumers, you can bring in this new Bovia product. Hopefully they're saying no, they don't want it. But consumers are very suspicious about it. They don't want to know. So they do want to know if it's being used, and they want to know so they don't have to buy it. They don't want it. But this is the way that technology is being introduced, is that even if it's against the public's preference, it goes onto the market, and then the ideal is you can jack up the market and don't allow people to express that preference because they don't know and there's no choice.
Can you explain what Bovea is?
Bovea is a feed additive. I'm not sure it's a bolus. There's maybe some other boluses, but it's a feed additive to reduce methane emissions.
And cows don't even fart.
Well, okay. Let's just quickly cover that one. Dairy NZ did research 15 years ago, maybe 20 now, and it looked at mixed forage, otherwise not just one ryegrass, but mixtures of forage, and it reduces methane, I think at the time, by about 30%. That you can't patent mixed forage. I say that, but I was pleased that the technology tent at Field Days this year, along with the drones, whatever else, they would say, "Oh, new technology, mixed grass." I thought, great, if you want to call it new technology, but as long as it's not GE, maybe it's a good thing. And this is a final one, and I'll go into some more details about specific risks. But Professor Jack Heinemann, who's one of the authors of this paper, he's a professor at the University of Canterbury. He's one of the leading lights globally on the ecological risks of genetic engineering. And this is an important paper because something so clever has happened as they continue to invest in this technology, is that you don't need a lab to do genetic engineering anymore. They can produce products that are gene editors that can be used in the field. Now that's my understanding. I'm not an expert. Talk to Jack and these experts. But this paper was written that, that targeted, it's just that insect, none of those other insects, just that one we're going to kill. Often, by the way, through the juvenile stage of the insect. stopping it develop really early, what other insect might they stop developing really early? But the point here is that there's a risk of new technology being introduced where they are spraying fields with technology that is effectively gene editing in the field. So it lands on the plant or lands on the insect and does the work there. Nanotechnology to keep it going in the field because it will disintegrate quite quickly. Does that sound familiar about things disintegrating quite quickly unless you encapsulate them and put them into things so they will stay longer in the environment? That's the kind of technology that's being developed. And that's why this paper says, hang on, you do not allow you might allow the products outside. If there was this like some plant or animal like those cows, but you can't be doing that in the field because it's completely uncontrollable. And that's what I'm saying is that's where the technology vision, those dreams and aspirations, that's how far it goes. And just in terms of the actual science, sorry, yeah?
I just wanted to ask, given that that man is in New Zealand and he's an expert, is he getting traction?
He gets some traction. He gets also a lot of pushback from the industry scientists. I mean, it's a battle, but that's why I'm here. There's a battle between scientists going on, and the public and nature is stuck in the middle. But the battle is between public interest scientists doing pure science and research into complex things without a product in mind, versus a whole lot of specialized scientists working with patents and contracts and a drive. You want your job? Where's the product? Where's the patentable output? And this is the way that the whole of the science development set up has gone, unfortunately. But this is one slide that's worth noting. So the battle, I don't know whether you ever heard about it, but there was a battle between Mexico and the United States about GE corn or GM corn. The Americans said, you've got to have it, and the Mexicans said, we don't want it. And they had it for a while, and then they realized it was contaminating their own fields. A whole lot of stuff has gone down. The reason why I mention it is there's a big dossier that I haven't read, by the way, but I've looked at it and thought, okay, that exists. There's a big dossier that the Mexicans use to defend their right to not have GM corn imposed on them. And
It's indigenous.
yes, because the indigenous corn is from there, so the whole complexity is much greater. But they actually also changed their national policy to say, what's the thing countries have? Constitution, thank you. They changed their constitution to say we can not have GM corn because it's a natural, very culturally based thing for them. Anyway, let me move forward. Halfway there, risks. I'll go into some specific risks in a minute, but remember I mentioned the last of that, the patents? In a way, patents is not a risk in itself because it's just money making. But what is a risk is ownership of nature itself, and then reseeding nature with owned objects or owned organisms. And what companies are now doing is they're not just patenting seeds, they're patenting traits. In other words, if something exists in nature and they can work out what the code is for it, they can patent that, and then anything else that uses that in future or is found to have it in future naturally is owned by them. So this is a terribly bad example, but it's the best one that comes to mind because it's a bad example. I'm about to talk about drought resistance, because drought resistance is a highly complex thing. It's not one trait. But say it was, if there was a little gene sequence that got every plant drought resistance and they identified it, then all the battle for humanity into the future, where you need a drought resistant crop, they'd charge you to use that sequence, even though it came from nature. Now, luckily, the drought resistant is not a good example because there's so much complexity, it won't be one trait. Well, the breast cancer test is a good example in medicine, whereby every time someone has a test for breast cancer, I think it's the Brassica gene, company, can't remember the name, Australian, I think, patented that, and they get a clip of the ticket on every test. Business. No labels, we've talked about that, but the P1055 is going through now. It's before Mr. Hogarth, the minister, to sign off, and the Australian ministers to sign off. P1055 is the food standards changes, and what P1055 does is move that dot. It moves it from there to there, so you don't have any rights to label. Companies aren't required to label the product. That's why we've been doing vigils outside supermarkets, because if companies and industry, the food biotechnology industry won't label these things. Supermarkets can and should and must. So in a way, what Fazans do is the key thing, but then what we do after that is the next key thing. And if you ever get a message from a company asking if the product's got GMO or G ingredients or anything, if they say they follow the Fazans rules, alarm bells should go off, or rather, no, a calm recognition that that's like saying you follow Monsanto's rules. You're following the biotechnology rules and their interests and not the public interest. They know, they've had so many submissions saying, yeah, it may not be a scientific thing, but because, no, it's all natural, remember, so there's no science debate, but we still want the right to choose, and they ignore those submissions. Labelling is out of scope. Labelling is out of scope for P1055 because they're not going to talk about labelling. And the argument is, labelling will continue, actually, for the GMOs. But they're not going to be using the GMOs anymore. Everything's going to be gene edited, and it won't be labelled in terms of the trajectory. I put this in there, unidentified new food allergens. If you leave companies to develop SDN1, SDN2, microbes, plants, animals, you're going to have new proteins and new risks emerge, and the companies will be looking for them. I have no doubt about that. But if they miss one, independent regulation is probably the best thing to have, and that's being taken away. So unidentified new food allergens may not have had many yet, but moving forward we could have a lot more. We've talked about the glyphosate, the crops, and again, it's unimaginable to think that we could have GE soy being grown in New Zealand one day. But that, if it was, it'd probably be glyphosate, herbicide resistant, increasing exposure. Maybe not. And the false, I did delete a slide here, but the false solutions being offered by gene editing and genetic engineering, they're actually ignoring real solutions like the mixed forage. We've invested millions of dollars and 20 years of time in GE ryegrass variants, but the mixed forage does that and always has done that. Reduces methane by 30%, maintains animal production and animal health, but no patent, no product. And the whole deal in New Zealand will be based on, we can have coexistence. You can have GE crops and GE-free crops, except that the basis of that is this year you can have GE-free crops and GE crops. Next year you'll have GE crops and not quite GE-free because they'll be a little bit contaminated. And then the next year, you have GE crops, and let's not talk about those because they're not really GE-free anymore because the contamination levels get increased, not annually by record, but goes from 0% to 1% to 5%. So in Australia, the contamination level for non-GMO canola is now 5% contamination with GMO. So that lack of purity, and at the moment, New Zealand has that because we haven't got anything growing in the environment that we know of. So moving very quickly, I won't dwell on these because we kind of covered them already, but the potential impacts on the very young of new foods, new products, new proteins, unexpected changes that no one thought would be of any risk to anyone except, some people have got certain syndromes, some people are of a certain age, or they're very young and their bodies are developing and it affects them. It doesn't affect anybody at adult level, but we don't know. And again, that's why I'm arguing for regulation and for transparency and for the choice to avoid these kind of food experiments. But a couple of years ago, this group wrote a whole report on trying to help mothers in America to choose non-GMO, non-glyphosate sprayed food because they can see it coming through in their data. The next one is, I've talked about this, the new food allergens. I Googled this because I haven't talked about food allergens for a long time, actually, mainly because we haven't got GE food coming into our supermarket, so it's not obvious where it might happen. When I Googled it, the main thing I got was there's no food allergen risks in GMO food. And I'd be happy if that's the case, and it maybe is the case in the past, but that's based on regulation. Those foods have been regulated. Even the foods that we import into New Zealand by Fazans from America have all gone through at least a rubber stamp kind of oversight. It should be much better. But if there's no oversight, then those allergens will emerge. I'm pretty sure that something will happen.
I would have thought Google is a really unreliable source of search thing.
Yeah.
Search into an X and a search thing there, you'll get a much deeper.
Oh no, I did. That was the first thing that came up. Don't worry. No, don't worry. Because I wanted to find like some examples, and I noticed that actually the first message was, "Oh no, there's nothing here." And my point is that may be the case, but it's from the past. We're future watching today. Without regulation, they will be. And then the final thing is impacts on the gut biome and the whole relationship. We talked about that slide at the beginning, our relationship with nature. Well, nature's inside our gut as well. So the whole relationship between health, gut, mental health, etc. And then there's the non-human impacts. Well, they're all human, I guess, but less personalised, but they're more generalised. And soil is absolutely in the firing line of industry. They've already marketed soil additives in America. And in contrast, I simplified the slide, but researchers in New Zealand at Lincoln University are researching soil microbes, fungi, and they've worked out a natural fungi that they're using to make a product, but a natural product as a soil health provider. That was a fungi that is not genetically engineered. And the slide I had before was like, that I've removed, but it contrasted working with nature and working against nature. And so there's lots of science, as I say, gene marker assisted breeding is working with nature. It's saying these naturally exist, this ram and this sheep, with something we like. So we can make them, we've identified it, but it's all kind of like a natural mating process that's holistic, not bit by bit. That's changing, and they're already starting it with the soil microbes. And the biggest fear, I guess, ultimately is a kind of broad collapse of pollination. Not that we're not seeing that already, but we might see again, depending on what the crop is, or depending on what the mistake is. It may not be a deliberate thing at all that happens, but I believe the bill should actually say the regulator needs to protect pollinators and bees and natural ecosystems as a requirement. Now, that's not what it's got, but anyway, that's the point I'm making. So let's quickly go on to economic risks. Fonterra and Federated Farmers and other industries, at field days, the head of beef and lamb came up to me and said that we've got our concerns too, we're pushing back on this. Now, whether the government listens is another matter, but they know that their money pipeline is they want to pay it both ways. They've got investments in lab-grown milk. They know that they might be able to get away with some kind of economic structure of their business with GE milk. I don't know. I mean, also GE ryegrass. They should know that it's not the benefit, but they might. Who knows what's in their minds? But they're not honest brokers. They're not saying, we get it, we can see our markets don't want it, and we're not going to have it. They're saying, oh, we get it, and we can see our markets don't want it, but maybe we could have a little bit of it, and maybe this is okay. Like, if you give animals GE feed, like imported grain, that won't end up in the milk, or at least won't end up in the milk a lot, and maybe people don't really need to know that we're using that. But if we were using GE cows, we'd tell people. So they want it a bit both ways, and they need to have it very clear, and that's what the protest was this morning, that GE Honesty organised, that you've got to speak up. You can't sit there saying, oh yeah, this is a threat to our economy, and they are such a major player in our economy. Yes, you want it both ways. Yes, you'd love to have patents, but not at the public expense.
And what about the health bill? I mean, that's going to be an incredible expense. I mean, all the gut problems people...
Well, and just be very clear, it's a very good point of saying, what about the health impacts and the cost of those? In America, we can see they're very unhealthy people, and I'm not saying it's just because of the GE food, but it partly is related to the industrialization of food and mechanization of food and taking away those natural aspects. And there's no tests. The reason why there's not a lot in that, what are the risks? I could find some papers. You can always find a paper to argue either way. You can find 10 or 20 papers to argue either way of any point. But this is an open book. We don't know what the risks are of any one product unless you check. And that's why we need regulation. Without regulation, we don't know what we're doing. And in America, there's been no traceability. There's no studies of who's eating GM food and who isn't. I mean, the argument is everyone's eating it, so how can you tell? But there's been never any independent studies.
Be a good, procedure.
Say again?
The Amish, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that some work might be done on that. It should be. Anyway, very quickly, this is a good slide. This is a positive slide. Today, There's no commercial GMO crops in New Zealand. When you go to the supermarket, the fruit and vegetables grown in New Zealand are GE-free, and they are for good reason, because we fought for that. And the changes in the Gene Bill and the FSAN's policies will mean that if someone wanted to introduce an SDN1, a little small change, or an SDN2, a little small change with a guide to sort of change it a bit more, they wouldn't have to label it. So that could be onions and crops, plants, fruit, it could be anything, if this bill goes ahead in the way it's pushing. So that's when somebody was asking me this morning, why are you talking about labelling? There's food in our system now that's not labelled. Well, yes and no. The main things that would have to be labelled, the main products, the bulk of the products, are not coming in to the supermarkets because they know labelling would mean people wouldn't buy it. There are a few in there. But take away labelling, then the entry is much easier. So no fruit and veg, imported GE-free GE soy in chicken feed, that's why I buy organic eggs, because all the chicken feed will have GE soy coming in, unless it's deliberately made not to have it. And there is labelling in New Zealand. We fought for very many years to get labelling of GE products in the supermarkets, and we've got it. It's not labelled in the restaurants. It's not labelled in the feed additives to animals. It's not labelled if it's highly processed oil. It's not labelled if it's this or it's that. But despite all that, that was a win, because we were supposed to have this debate and lose this 25 years ago. So if we lose it this time, I don't think we will, but if we lose it this time, we won for 25 years because the market spoke. The labelling in place means they don't want to use it if they have to label it, and therefore it's not used. It's been pushed back out of our food system. That's my understanding, apart from things they can get away with, doesn't have to be labelled, etc. The companies... Yeah, it is a victory. It was a hidden victory. They've waited for us to all go to sleep, and now they're saying, no one cares, no one knows about it. That's because we haven't got it here. In America, they know about it, and the non-GMO project emerged because they had no labelling there. So the companies and organisations and communities created a system where they would have labelling. It would be the non-GMO label, and that's what Fonterra uses, at least on some of its products in America, the non-GMO project label. The non-GMO project is a consumer, and now more official, uprise against the lack of choice that was happening in America in the previous times.
With all of this, where do you see is the greatest hope?
Here.
Here, making ourselves
Here.
known.
There's that old phrase, never doubt that a small group of people can make a change. In fact, it's the only thing it ever has. Now, I know it's a bit of an old cliche, but it's true. I've been doing this for quite a few years. Other people here have. Some new people, young people who weren't around 25 years ago. It's about it. It's all being recorded. It's all going down on the internet. So just bear with me. I've got another 10 minutes very quickly, because I'm a marketer, market researcher, and I've also on X, I'm Brand New Zealand. And I advocate for Brand New Zealand because countries are a brand. I know we may not like it, but that's the reality. In the marketing world, countries are brands too. And Brand New Zealand does actually exist. It exists in our imaginations, in our hopes. It exists in different ways, so it's not one thing. No one really owns it, except lots of companies benefit from it. I speak to farmers and they say, no one cares about GE overseas. Yes, they do. All our New Zealand products are benefiting from an aura of being non-GMO, whether they know it or not. So Brand New Zealand exists, and it's worth a lot of money. A simple aside than the one I had before, it's about $40 billion in value. This is, again, there's global organisations that calculate the value of countries as brands. And I just want to talk about...
When they're feeding crops to the animals, they're feeding stuff that couldn't have GMO.
Because they're getting it wrong. They haven't got the integrity of... Fonterra's got brands. Just very quickly, Fonterra has got brands. Fonterra is a brand, and Fonterra benefits from being Brand New Zealand. But what Fonterra doesn't realise is that brands are the shop window to the world. So they're currently selling their brands to have no shop window to the world and become a commodity supplier or food sector supplier to people like Nestle. But to sell our brands, in my view, is a major mistake because it's our shop window. So Anchor and Mainland. And the basis of their selling these brands to lots of companies who are very keen to get the brands, by the way. In fact, I wrote a letter, I was hoping it might be published. It was a letter to the Herald. It said, all these other companies want some of what New Zealand's has got to offer. Why doesn't Fonterra? Why is Fonterra actually selling its brands? And there is an argument. It's like most of their money comes from this. And the bottom line is, it's difficult. They say it's difficult to market brands. So other people can do it better than us. So we're going to sell our brands and let them do the marketing of our brands because we can't do it.
So if somehow we could get New Zealand to be GMO free and all the ramifications, we would have a very, very high price product.
Correct. And ironically, that's what we've got by default because of the win 25 years ago. That's what we've got. By default, all the food grown here is GM free. They're only allowing contamination in here or any additives in the food system. But actually, what you said is why we're here today. And that's why it's such an astonishing thing that the government didn't do an economic analysis of this bill. And more bizarrely, the regulator in the future, looking at GE applications, does not have to consider risks and benefits. So the risks and benefits, that is gone. It's a rubber stamp through, as far as I can tell, from the future regulator. Just quickly finishing on brands, and when brands are like people in the marketing world, and when brands do bad things, people, if they hear about it, don't like it. So we're about to do a very bad thing for a brand in New Zealand if we allow unregulated genetic engineering, which this bill proposes. There's 25 years ago, a biotechnology company had to quit New Zealand, went bankrupt. The public paid for the cleanup. Just remember that when we're talking to local councils, the public have paid before. There's been a long hiatus in these experiments in terms of field trials in the open doors. But if they come back and there's damage to our waterways, damage to our soil, if the company's gone bankrupt, no money. So what about insurance being required of them? What about a bond being required of them? And certainly not insurance, but bonds is what we've got in the unitary plan in Auckland now and in Northland and other councils. We've got precautions in our unitary plan against being left carrying the baby. If the company goes bankrupt, they've already, number one, they've had to register what they want to do. It's a forbidden activity, actually. They can ask for a plan change, but certainly Northland, I think, has got a bond. You have to have a bond to cover, clean up, etc. And if not, specifically, that's what we need. So the history of the public ending up paying for a company going wrong, absolutely. This one in the middle, it's just being updated. It's a GE3 report by Claire Bleakley, who looked at all the animal experiments. What animal experiments? I thought we were GE3 and there was no GMOs in New Zealand. Well, there have been experiments and there have been field trials, but no, there's been a ban. Oh, no, there hasn't. There's never been a ban. There was a ban for like 2 years while the Royal Commission sat, just after. But there has been no ban. It's just really strict rules that say, show me the evidence of safety to human beings and the environment. Too hard. That's what this gene technology bill is about. Industry have said, oh, that's too hard. I know we could have applied, but it's so hard. Can we not just not have to apply at all? Yeah, that's what this new bill does. Don't have to apply at all. That was too hard for you guys, then don't even apply. We'll just call it natural, and we'll just carry on doing it there. So animals have suffered a lot, and I got a call from Eloise Gibson, who's still out there as a journalist, and that's in May 2010. Woke up, phone ring, oh, hello, it's Eloise Gibson, New Zealand Herald. I was just doing an article about the cows and exploding ovaries, and I said, what? I didn't know anything about it. But that's what happened. The cows were developing prematurely. Their ovaries were exploding as calves. So they were euthanized. And it wasn't shut down, it's still going in various forms. But animal welfare, do you remember I was saying what's not in that bill? No ethics, not just for human ethics, but animal ethics. It'll be managed by some other group, says Judith, the minister. There's other rules that cover things like that. Well, it didn't cover that. Anyway, quick slide. Back to the money, one slide. This is actually the North American non-GMO market to 2032. It goes up like that. And I could show you other examples of slides for the global market that go up like that for the non-GMO food that people want, that we've got, that is our future benefit for 1,000 years if we can protect it. So it's very bizarre that there's no economic analysis. And again, I go back to how do we fight this bill, and we'll come on to that shortly. But how do we fight this bill? The discussions in this room and other places has to be about the money, because there's money being played here and money being lost here into the future. And I think the only thing the government will listen to is something like that, but in their face, and I don't mean literally in their face, but we almost need some markets overseas to say, hey, we're not going to buy your products. It might be going on behind the scenes, we don't hear about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, quickly on to the right to choose. I put this in because this debate's going on in Europe, the same debate. In 2018, you remember my little dot? In 2018, the European Union Court of Justice, I think it was, were asked to decide, is gene editing GMO? Because we don't want to regulate it as, but should it, is it or isn't it? And their decision, Court of Justice, was it has to be regulated as GMOs because it's so powerful. It's got the potential to do more than just mutagenesis with scrambling of radiation. It's got its depth of penetration, its efficiency of changing a gene sequence. If that gene sequence is here and there and there and in another organism over there, if it's exposed to the gene editing, every sequence like that will be changed because that's what CRISPR is. It's incredibly clever, incredibly efficient. Also has side effects and unexpected changes. So in terms of the reason why this is up, the right to choose, in Europe, the food industry have really stood up for the right to choose for consumers, as they have the same debate. Despite that Court of Justice decision, the industry have pushed on since 2018 and saying, oh yeah, don't worry about that court decision. No, it's less like nature, isn't it? So the debate's going on there, but the debate seems clear. Simon Terry from, has got an article in Newsroom, I think yesterday. Simon Terry from the Sustainability Council of New Zealand. And he points out that even in Europe, with this debate going on, the outcome seems to be, okay, you still have to trace them and you still have to label them, even if you're not going to regulate them for safety, because they're safe, because they're like nature. People don't buy that and you're going to have to trace it. So the problem in New Zealand is that that's the situation today, but Zespri, and I name Zespri because I watched their presentation to the Select Committee on the bill, the head of their global group or one of their seniors. And it was the bit he got to here, and I'll act it out for you, but it's the bit that got me going, hang on a minute, guys. You've had this huge success for decades with a non-GMO pipeline. All your gold kiwi fruit and even your little red kiwi fruit, traditionally bred, non-GMO, not gene-edited. And then the guys sat there and saying, oh yes, we had a huge success and now we're moving into gene editing because that's just an extension of natural breeding. And I thought, hang on a minute. Okay, this is your presentation to the Select Committee. It's just you, a couple of guys, head of the company. But that is you saying that made me feel very alarmed. And I actually said it to the field days. Every time I saw a Zespri guy or woman, I'd say, hey, your guy is saying this, and it's not the case. Gene editing is not an extension of nature. It is an extension of genetic engineering, and it is still genetic engineering. So I did this, and I've done a couple of posts, and I'll carry on doing a couple of posts every time it comes to mind, because Zespri have had this huge success. They should be proudly GE-free, but like all the companies, and the science is so tempting, the science is so seductive, that they've all bought into it, and they've invested in it. And so once you've got a sunk investment, you can't, like, oh yeah, maybe not, we don't need that. We don't need the GE ryegrass, 20 years and $27 million. Please do. I've written an article for their magazine, and ironically, the opposition was supposed to write an article for that magazine, and they never wrote one. So then the guy, I said, well, mine could still go in, and he said, oh no, I'm going to leave it for the next one, which happens. So it might come out, but I actually go through it and say, please be aware, the consumers don't agree with your lab scientists or your head honcho saying la la la. Very quickly, GE-free policies in the supermarkets, again, hard fought for. We've only got labelling because we protested 25 years ago. We've only got GE-free policies in the supermarkets because Woolworths is actually better than Pam's. Woolworths have got a little bit more of a, when I say better, they've got a little bit more of a global view, and they can see in Australia and New Zealand, they've got quite a strong non-GMO policy for their own brands like Macro and Woolworths, or what used to be Countdown. Pam's a little bit more second best. Of the two of them, they're the second best because they're allowing, or at least they're not preventing GE animal feed being used for their milk or cheese products. Now, I hope that they are preventing it. In their message, they say they're not in their message, they said, though, they obey FSANZ. And as I said to you earlier, any company that says, oh, we obey FSANZ, it's like saying we obey Monsanto. Now, I do exaggerate a little bit, but not much. The Monsanto vision of the world is infiltrated through FSANZ to say, doesn't need labelling, that's safe, the companies can do that themselves. Yep, increased glyphosate, that's still very low compared with what you could get, so you're all going to be happy, right? So that's their modus operandi. So that's why I say, if they obey FSANZ, you might as well say you're obeying Monsanto. But FSANZ rules allow them to use products hidden, and would allow them to use feed and still say they're non-GMO. And this is why you don't see a lot of these companies claiming we're non-GMO, because they know that there's a little place in between the animal feed and the milk where, hang on, when you say it wasn't GMO, well, the animal wasn't GMO, but you fed it GMO. Well, yeah, but the milk's not GMO. Well, hang on. And that's the debate. How much goes through? Is it biologically significant? Should people have the choice to avoid it? Either way. So the battle for these supermarkets is this is like a head of game. The FSANZ P1055 hasn't yet passed. If it does pass, because Andrew Hogarth signs it off and the Australians sign it off, it will allow unregulated gene-edited products, because they're no longer deemed as genetic modified, to enter the food system. And it's then that the supermarkets, with all their buying power, can say, okay, yeah, FSANZ have allowed this. The outcome is, well, we follow FSANZ and more. We're FSANZ plus. We can see FSANZ have got their own rules, but we've got a slightly higher level of standard for our products, which are GE-free in New Zealand for Pam's and for Woolworths. That's the dream. And it's almost there. The problem is it's about to be pushed back and told that nothing's GE-free, it's everywhere, whereas we're trying to make sure that there is an option, which might be diverse brands. Very quickly, so supermarkets must label it. Very quickly, and probably most important for this group, but democracy is an issue for local government. Sorry to be a bit boring on this, but I've tried so hard to talk to council. Thank you for your help. Wouldn't let me speak at council, to councillors about the subject, about the gene technology bill, about my request to council to defend the existing unitary plan with precautionary policies in it to say the things I've told you about. You're not allowed to do a GE release or a field trial. If you do want to do it, you have to register it. You have to put a bond in. All these these basically containment strategies in the policies, not just in Auckland, but in Northland, in Whangarei, Hastings have actually got really strong GM-free policies. The policy doesn't say GM-free. The policy says precaution and protection of the natural environment. And it's all through the RMA, which is being changed, good or bad, but they've already started removing the powers of this from the government. So the bill takes away the powers of local government under the RMA to regulate GMOs in any other way than any other product. So GE disappears. GMOs disappear because they're not allowed to regulate them. So very quickly, Valentina Denicha. I came across her when I was watching the parliamentary submissions. The submission that she made, the written submission, I only put it there for reference. Very eye-opening. 10 or 15 years study of what has been going on in our media and communications around GE and what's been lobbying in New Zealand, or who's been lobbying. And it's a very beautiful piece of work, because when you read that, you can understand why people meet you on the streets. Oh, I've never heard about it. Oh, I think it's going to be great. Oh, save the mower. It's of years and years of pushing, whether it's politicians or industry or academia or the public, to say, oh, nothing to see here.
And political parties.
Just to be clear, this is the best, I'm still using this is from about October last year. pre the bill coming out, so no one knowing the details. This survey was done by a group who, I think they did it off their own back. They're obviously involved with the primary industries. They may have gone in with a predetermined answer. They certainly came out with a predetermined answer. Yeah, thank you. You see that where it says 14%? On the primary purpose, the people who did this study, and it was talking to farmers, and the main thing was farmers, it's so complex, guys. The farmers don't even know what they're talking about. Oh yeah, I want it. What do you want? Well, I don't know, but I want that. What is it? So when they did their version of this chart, it said 40, 50, 59 or 69%. They added those top two boxes and put the figure in there to say there's support for the gene technology bill or changes to the bill. And to be fair enough, there is a little bit. But let me just read you what this 45% is. The point here is that only 14% actually support the radical bill that came out in November, December. They hadn't seen it when they said this, but that's the people saying ease regulations, allow greater use, capture the benefits for productivity and resilience. 14% are saying, yeah, let's go for it, which is what this bill does. The next 45%, and I'd argue they're with us. The bottom 29% are keep New Zealand's food GE-free. But that 45% are probably the people who say, yeah, keep the food GE-free, but maybe have some medicine. And let me read what it says. Encourage further exploration of genetic technologies. Tick, that's what we've been doing for 10, 15 years, still do. Assessing potential on a case-by-case basis to ensure they are safe. The bill removes case-by-case assessment, and it excludes a whole lot of things from safety evaluation. So that 45% aren't getting what they want either. So the only people who are getting what they want are the biotechnology industry and some of those 14%, and they probably don't know what we're talking about either. No. Anyway, moving on, I believe, even though it's gone very low key, 25 years ago, it was the pop stars and the chefs and the TV stars who all came out for a national identity to be GE-free. And ironically, that's what we've got. But it's all under the radar, all being nibbled out of the edges with imported GE feed or hidden ingredients. But for the local council debate, I used this slide. So eventually, I did get listened to by some local boards, and I went to the Hauraki Gulf Forum, and I presented this slide to explain to them what's happening today with the Gene Technology Bill is that today, with HASNO and the RMA, councils can impose precaution or apply precaution through the local government, and it's in our unitary plan. All on the deal that the risks are socialised on the public. So if something goes wrong from an approved GE product, it's a bit like nuclear power, the public pay. Because it was approved and okay, the system didn't quite work that time and okay, they were all bung in to help them out. Socialised risk. The Gene Technology Bill says you're not allowed to have precaution. So the regulator, the precautionary principle has been removed from his responsibilities. But they've also said to local government, and you can't have precaution. So we're taking that out of your remit by changing the RMA, or rather by changing this bill. So you can have no unitary plan protections. They're going to be deleted from your plans. But oh no, we're not going to have any liability, and we're not going to have mandatory insurance. So yeah, you're doing that, but socialised risk still. So if anything goes wrong, it's you guys. Now our council have been, when I say our council, our mayor and others have been outrageous in being silent on this issue. And let me show you why they might be silent, but with no good justification. They're there to represent all of us, not just some lobby groups.
Can I just correct you on that?
Sure.
The person who was against it being presented to the council was the Chief Strategy Officer, Megan Tyler.
Yeah.
It only takes one bad apple.
Well, she's very powerful. So this is it. So I've never had any contact with the mayor, but I came across this, and this is him announcing a new initiative of combining universities, government and industry, the Alliance for Technology, the Alliance for Innovation and Technology. And I came across, and it's got a little blurb up there. Look, I'm not against advancing all of these things, but when I saw Daisy Lab pop up on his video, I thought, well, he's bought into Daisy Lab being the way of the future. It may be, there may be something great. But that doesn't mean we give up our precautionary policies to protect nature and the environment and the right to choose. It's not an either or, you can have both, especially for contained research and contained production. I'm not for it, but I can't be against it because it is what it is. I'm against that being released into the environment or released into our food system without any choice or controls. So the mayor needs to speak up and the council needs to speak up. Of course they're not. Other councils are though. Just to be clear, other councils wrote to the select committee and made a submission and said, no, this is disastrous for our region. Northland, GE3 Hastings. They're saying no. But our thanks to the control over them, our councillors have said, oh. Anyway, but liability, and as I say, liability and insurance needs to be part of this because it's all about the money, and money can push back money if it's in the right place. And liability, rather than socialised risk, is a key thing that our council should be arguing for. It's not, but it should be. So those are the policies in the unitary plan today, and without them, we lose control over GE organisms. We have unknown impacts on life in Auckland. There are no financial instruments, but there should be, and we need to have the right to protect nature, which is, I say, all of those things are what Chapter B10 and E37 try and do to stop that loss of control. So just finally, these really are the final slides, 4 or 5 slides. Of these were like peak points for some submissions to the Royal Commission, to the Select Committee on the Gene Technology Bill. So I'll just play out a few of them. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, a couple of things. He opened his talk saying, oh, excuse me, but by the way, can we call a spade a spade? He didn't quite say that, but these are GMOs. Can we talk about GMOs, not regulated organisms and unregulated organisms? Going back to the language thing, they're so nervous about, oh, when I said it was G, I meant genetic, not genetic. But he says, try and be straight up about the language. We're talking about GE, we're talking about genetic engineering, we're talking about GMOs. That's what we're talking about. Some may be safe, some may not, but don't try and pretend the language, oh, these aren't even that. Yeah. He also said at the end, introduce civil liability, because this bill transfers risks from industry to the public, and they need to be liable. Yeah. The Jack Heinemann, who I mentioned earlier, Professor Jack Heinemann, he is the head or one of the heads of the Centre for Biosafety Research at Canterbury University. His submission said the same thing. You're better off sticking with HASNO, where it's a bit difficult to prove it's safe for health and environment, but much more rigorous with precaution in place. Amend HASNO rather than have this new bill. This wasn't a submission, sorry, this was an article that came out about a month ago. It was the final ratification of a very slow-moving treaty called the Our House Convention, which is part of the Convention on Biodiversity, and the last of whatever number of countries to signed it about a month ago or 2 months ago. And what the Our House Convention says is that when it comes to dealing with GMOs and the impact on society, you've got to engage the public. You've got to engage communities across society, not just leave it to the technical experts. This bill never did that. It doesn't do that. Now it has no forward-looking policy to do that. There's no kind of committee of the public to input into the future regulations or anything. So the Our House Convention, which we are a signatory to, says we should have a voice, and we haven't got one apart from in here at the moment. And then PSGR, which I'm a trustee for, Physicians and Scientists for Global Responsibility, they put forward a number of papers. One was actually on the science funding system leading to rubbish like this and not to sustainable interventions in nature or to protect nature. But they said we should have a public inquiry. And the reasons why they said there should be a public inquiry is because this bill is a jack-up. It has been written by industry, for industry, behind closed doors, with vested interests, people who have got absolute patent interests in the outcomes of this bill guiding it. Thank you.
That was the difference between the recent bill and 25 years ago. People were actually bragging this time about how many personal patents they had. One guy said 14, another guy said 4, even though he used to work for DSIR. I don't know whether he's allowed to have 4. But that was the difference in attitude.
So again, there's lots of patents, and again, it's part of the world we're in. But patents is at whose cost? So it's just the time to stop and think. Oh, sorry, mate.
I was just going to say, I think I mentioned to you before that Guy Hatcher wrote previously about how so many of these patents to do with biotech and all that are held by massive US corporations, and that what he's hearing is that a free trade deal with the US depends on our government passing this bill.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Is answering to globalists and literally compromising our health and well-being as on all levels as a nation for money.
To align with the markets or global partners.
Well, I really was thinking it's shades of the last 5 years. You know, the pharmaceutical companies don't have to fork out for any industry.
That's right. Subsidising
Just like-
biotechnology industry.
Same way, yeah.
So this is the last couple of slides. I think there should be a national food strategy. I think there should be a national debate. I think there should be lots of little meetings all around the country with farmers. That ain't happening. It should have happened before this bill. It should happen after. There's a group called Take 5 who ran a campaign 20 years ago, and I think they're going to reboot the campaign. And one of the things I want to encourage them to do is to take 5 as a theme. So let's take 5 years. You know, we had that ban, but it wasn't a ban. We had never had any field trials. We did have field trials. Well, what about a ban? What about a moratorium on commercial release of GMOs in New Zealand for the next 5 years? Actually bring in a ban. And that would allow time to have these things. Well, so the Take 5 and the idea of 5-year freeze or something is a strategy, but that's a complementary strategy. I think one of the things I'd like to see is, amongst others, if we need to, have a 5-year moratorium. And if they won't agree to it, they want to push the bill through, then it becomes a referendum on a 5-year moratorium. And the reason why I say it's a 5-year moratorium is because I think there's a lot of people out there sitting on fences going, you know, people, oh, I'm not sure I want to ban it. Well, no one's asking to ban it. Well, if it's been banned, no, it hasn't been banned. You know, that whole conversation, what about the sick children? You know, all of these things, I think there is a difference, even though they're merging that difference with the vaccines and aerial spraying of vaccines potentially in the future. But I think there's a difference between inside and outside. And I think a ban on environmental release, which is what they claimed, look, it's unlikely to happen. They're unlikely to buy into it. But again, I don't think it's necessary. It doesn't mean we go for a petition to say that's what we want. And it could be, I think it would be very hard to say ban GE in New Zealand. But we can win ban GE release in New Zealand into the food environment. Anyway, that's my thoughts. It's the economy, stupid. I put that up there because whatever we say about health and rights and the right to choose and nature and human generations into the future, these people are money people. And so the one thing that should be the easiest buy-in to stop this bill is, oh yeah, we didn't look at the costs to the economy and maybe we need to do a little bit more work. Kiwis want natural choice. Our exports want a natural choice. Of course, not everybody. The cows getting the GE feed aren't choosing it necessarily, and the ethanol machines running on ethanol aren't choosing the ethanol from GE. But the majority of people who've got a choice in what they buy would definitely prefer GE-free product over GE. And yes, there may be a promise in the future, but this is even better. This is an apple that's got not just vitamin C, but it's also got vitamin D. And all right. Yeah. But so does the sun. All those fake solutions to existing solutions is the problem. In America, one of the products that I didn't claim, but it hasn't disappeared, was a non-browning apple that is now sliced and put into a plastic bag, mass-produced, and given to schools.
Please.
School kids are getting the non-browning apple. So my final point, what consumers want must not be taken away, and that's what we're facing. So today, and maybe I'll stop there, but this is our kind of public awareness and action need. Ministers, they've got a lot of power. MPs, they've got some power, but they're also cowed underneath their party thumb. They had a lot of guts to push back. So in a way, the public needs to give them that strength of confidence to say, we really can't pass this bill. I think brands, please write to Zespri. I heard this guy saying that you were thinking of going into gene editing, and will he be labelling it? And have you got any alternatives not to? Fonterra, we did a protest this morning. Beef and lamb, they might be interested to hear from us because, again, at least they were the only ones who came up to me to say, yeah, we're fighting this. The supermarkets, we've got to keep on that because if Fazans and this gene technology push on, they're the front line. They're where we buy our food most of the time. And we've talked about the local government elections, so what can we do about that? So that's really it. Vote for you, vote for you, vote for you.
Candidates here, well, that's it. Everybody stand up and let us see you, and who's your colleague?
So thank you very much. Let's leave you, I think that was it. This is the checklist. We'll go back to that previous slide, but this is the checklist to like what comes out of the select committee in the next couple of weeks. You know, has it got precautionary policy back in there? Does it do any protection for organic and non-GE free production? Does it protect consumer and farmer rights and the right to choose and labelling and traceability? Does it have any ethics or any kind of prevention of animal cruelty or human cruelty, actually? And does it impose liability on the users so that they can be charged when they cause damage? So that's the checklist. And that's only a short checklist, of course, that previous one at the beginning. But anyway, I'll close there, and thank you very much, and I hope that was of interest.
John, are you going to take any questions?
Absolutely.
Questions, people? Any questions? Oh, I've got one. So, are you getting any positive response from ministers or MPs?
Okay. Whatever you guys have done, and thousands of other people have done, is having some effect, but it's not enough yet